So, welcome everybody to VMware Explore. My name is Justin Brandon. I'm a multi-cloud solutions architect, part of the worldwide multi-cloud architecture group. Today, we're going to be presenting challenges and benefits of VMware multi-cloud. My co-presenter today is my colleague, Joseph Polcar. So just a little bit of background. Anybody that read the description might be a little confused. You heard it's Kyle Oliveira supposed to be standing here, but it's me instead. So I took this on last minute, so apologize for the confusion. And let's get started.
That's okay. Kyle's right back there, so if we have any
questions.
If
you want to yell, Kyle's right there. So today we're going to kind of overview some of the challenges associated with multi-cloud and how you can alleviate some of those challenges. What are the use case and drivers? What are the benefits for adopting a multi-cloud strategy? What are the differentiators associated with those multi-clouds, and what are the differences between those? And finally, some common questions and open Q&A if we have time. So this is just a little bit about myself. I have 11 years of enterprise IT infrastructure experience. I'm currently staffed as a multi-cloud solutions architect with VMware. Obviously, for the past year, I've been focused on a premier GSI partner, helping them develop a go-to-market strategy, talking about the very same strategies that I'll talk about in the presentation. And Joseph?
My turn. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph Polcar, also on the multi-cloud team with Justin here. And a lot of what we work on is helping partners adopt a multi-cloud strategy. We have a strategy and an architecture side, so we're both on the architecture side. My background is mostly with cloud service providers, particularly government service providers. So I work a lot with VCPP partners and whatnot. That's primarily my background, but of course, multi-cloud is where everything's going. So that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, so the first thing I want to start off with is, has anyone noticed a theme for this year's VMware Explore? Like anyone? Like this can be interactive, so anything.
Everybody's jazzed.
Jazzed, okay.
That's right.
Yeah, Jack, there you go. You might have heard multi-cloud a couple of times. There's kind of a buzzword. Yeah, like 2 or 3 times, right? Yes, so this probably comes as no surprise. Multi-cloud is accelerating. There's a reason for that. So really initiatives, if you think about it, over the past few years have shifted from kind of a hybrid cloud approach. That was the buzzword a few years ago, and now it's multi-cloud, right? That's the use of 2 or more cloud providers simultaneously. And that can be some combination of either private, public, or edge. So that's really what we're talking about when we talk about multi-cloud. Now this strategy, it gets employed because there's a reason you might not want to use just one provider, right? There are cases where one provider may offer some service that another doesn't, and you also don't want to get tied into a single vendor. So that's usually some of the common issues. But it's not related to just infrastructure, right? It's more than that. It also includes the applications, right? We're modernizing applications, traditional applications using a DevSecOps approach, and we're using centralized Kubernetes management and microservices and whatnot. So that's all part of this process, this multi-cloud process. Additionally, you have to think about the management and operations of multi-cloud, right? It becomes even more important to have a centralized management plane that you can monitor the environment and perform reporting on so that you have visibility and insight to every single cloud provider that you're working with. And then last but not least, of course, are the cloud services, right? These are all the native services and whatnot that you're working with. That also gets difficult to manage at scale. So these are a lot of the things that you have to consider when you're looking at multi-cloud. All right, so what stands in the way of success for multi-cloud, right? A lot of these are the most common challenges that we hear from our customers. So this is just from our experience. So I'm curious if anyone else has anything to add to this, and we can take that back. But the first that we've noticed is, how do you manage a multi-cloud environment without creating multiple cloud silos, right? That's the biggest thing that we're noticing. It becomes really difficult to manage disparate infrastructures. The second is related to skills, right? You either have to train up your existing employees on how do you operate in these different platforms, or you can hire new employees, right? So that's a challenge. And then, of course, consistent security and governance. This is, every cloud provider is different, so there's going to be different security postures for each one. I myself come from, the federal background, so did a lot of work with FedRAMP, and that was really challenging. I can only imagine working in a multi-cloud landscape. Every time you deploy a new environment, you have to go through an accreditation process again, and the more you can reduce the differences between each of those infrastructures, that's going to make the process a lot easier to go through. And then, of course, operational continuity, right? How do you transition to multi-cloud and try to keep that continuity between each of the service providers? All of these things are really the top challenges that we're noticing. Yes. Sure, sure. Mhm.
You're essentially forced to being siloed because of egress charges,
Right.
right? Provided data, but especially when you're trying to bring out data, that's going to cost you a fortune.
Right. Yes. Yes. So the question was, how do you manage those cloud silos when you're having to deal with egress costs?
Egress charges.
Right. Okay. So you're forced to be siloed because of egress charges. Right. So that is, I mean, that is a difficulty, right? For example, we're using like Megaport for interconnectivity between our cloud providers. So if you can use like a direct connect and things like that, in some cases you can get around that, but that is a challenge. Absolutely. Right. So I think it's more having the agility to be able to migrate to different clouds, not necessarily that you're doing it all the time. Right.
Yeah.
So you don't want to get locked into a single provider. That's the most important part, so that you have that agility to move around.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes, yes, exactly. You're preparing for in case you need to migrate. And of course, you can practice that ahead of time, but as business needs change, you don't want to end up in a situation where you have to, refactor going into a different platform. So definitely. And any other questions, if anyone does have questions,
Yeah.
feel free to ask throughout.
Throw 'em out there.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so one of the major obstacles to rapid cloud migration that companies are looking for is the difficulty of moving those apps to the cloud from their on-prem infrastructure, right? You're typically working with vSphere VMs on-prem, and now you're having to migrate to a completely different platform offered by potentially one of the hyperscalers. So that's really challenging. So typically to overcome this, you would rewrite or re-platform the application. But this typically doesn't happen, right? It's difficult to do. It's potentially a slow and long process. And a lot of times companies don't have the skill set required to rewrite the application, right? So only what we're seeing is only 9% actually rewrite the application. Instead, they just make the minimum necessary changes to get their existing VMs running in the cloud, right? So you're left with basically apps that are not optimized to run in the cloud, and that becomes a challenge. So if you're doing this re-platforming and not optimizing it, right, you're using costly cloud resources ineffectively, essentially, and that can negatively impact on-prem budgets. So that's one thing that we're noticing. You actually start to pull from the on-prem budget because you're exceeding your cloud budget.
Yep.
And then, of course, one of the biggest fears, I would say, of IT leaders is not being able to move out of that existing cloud. So at the bottom, you'll notice, on average, it takes a year to migrate to a different platform. So that's what we want to try to avoid with multi-cloud, right? Is if you need to move for any reason, it should be easily done, right? All right, so why multi-cloud? So I have to give credit on this meme. one of the guys in our team posted this in a chat. And I'm like, I'm going to use that. I'm going to find a way. So why do we actually use multi-cloud, right? What are the use cases? The biggest, I would say, is differentiated native services. Like I mentioned earlier, each provider is going to have their own services that they offer, and that's one of the biggest reasons you might want to have a footprint in each one, right? It depends on what your business needs are. Capacity augmentation and elasticity, right? This is a pretty basic cloud concept. A data center evacuation or consolidation. Obviously, these are all still apply to multi-cloud. Geographic expansion, right? Different providers are going to have different regions and availability zone coverage. Prescriptive application modernization. Disaster recovery and business continuity. So all of these are reasons we're seeing, these are some of the core use cases behind multi-cloud. And then data sovereignty and regulatory compliance. Perhaps the provider you're working with now doesn't offer some of the data sovereignty or compliance standards that you need going forward. For example, if you're working with credit cards and you have to conform with PCI compliance and whatnot, you have to make sure the provider's certified in that. So.
Are those similar use cases you guys are seeing to adopt multi-cloud?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so some of the drivers, I mean, some of these are similar to the use cases, but market competition, obviously. If you have a footprint in multiple providers and you can easily migrate from one to the other, you have that leverage to negotiate with providers, perhaps for a better price, right? Support capabilities. Who are you actually reaching out to for support, and what level of support do you get? All of that could change from provider to provider. Business agility and operational consistency, that's obviously one thing that's been mentioned quite a bit. If your business needs change, you have to be able to migrate rapidly. And then cost, consumption, and licensing models are all going to vary from provider to provider. And reduced reliance on a single provider, right? Preventing that provider lock-in, which is pretty common right now, what we're seeing. And then enhanced service availability. This kind of comes back to the different regions available from each provider. And then tech refreshes would also potentially drive this change. And then business continuity, which we've kind of covered already. So, all right, I'm going to hand it back to Justin.
Thanks, Joe.
There you go.
Okay, so given all those things that Joseph mentioned, the business drivers, what are some of the challenges with multi-cloud and all the complexities that are inherent with adopting a multi-cloud strategy? So how does VMware see that, solving that problem? So VMware really sees this as enabling not a cloud-first approach, but more of a cloud-smart approach. So you're looking to leverage VMware services across these various clouds. So what does that look like? So it is a consistent experience across any of the public cloud providers, whether it's private cloud provider, sovereign cloud providers, or even edge providers as well. Built on top of VCF, VMware Cloud Foundation with NSX, vSAN, and ESXi we're all familiar with. VMware really sees a unique placement to enable a unified operational experience, allowing you to move applications to any cloud that you see fit. So it's really a cloud smart approach that you want to look for as you adopt this multi-cloud strategy, and VMware can help with that placement of those for that.
Yep, and I would say like the key here is that it's a unified architecture, right? How do you keep that consistency across the different providers, whether you're working with one of the hyperscalers or one of our partners? That's really important, that you can keep that consistency and get over some of those challenges I mentioned earlier.
Yes. It's not working. So here are some of the benefits with VMware Cloud, starting with oversubscription. VMware Cloud allows you to really squeeze the resources as you see fit. Compared to native cloud implementations, you're kind of bound by these t-shirt size workloads that you have, and whether you use those or not, you're still getting charged by the public cloud provider. So with VMware Cloud, you have the ability to leverage, you have access to your ESXi host, you have the ability to oversubscribe. You can make your VM the size you want and really take advantage of that oversubscription. So that's one of the key benefits. Obviously, there's reduced overhead. There's less operational overhead to maintain infrastructure, patching, updating. That frees up more time and enables more effort from your resources. Again, operational consistency, like Joseph mentioned, it's VCF on any public cloud provider. Same experience, same infrastructure consistency. And in addition to that, you're leveraging existing skill set that your operation team has. They don't have to learn a new API, a new set of tools. You have the same experience, whether it's Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, it's the same experience. Scalability. You can easily add hosts, additional hosts if needed. There are also a number of DR strategies that you can leverage as well, such as SRM and VCDR. Cloud bursting. Because there's no refactoring or reformatting the actual VM itself, you can easily move that workload to the cloud given the network connectivity is in place. And arguably VMware Cloud has some of the fastest migration metrics. Because there is no refactoring, essentially it's the same VCF installation as your on-prem. You're moving that workload easily to your landing zone, I would say, of your choice, whether it's any of the public cloud providers.
Yeah, and I would just add to the migration point, right? With HCX, you get the live migration capability or the bulk migration capability. So if uptime is important to you, you can do the live migration, or if you're trying to migrate as many workloads at one time, so it really meets both use cases. But either way, it's a lot quicker than refactoring an app each time you want to go to a different cloud.
Yep, good point. You also have direct access to native services. So you're not in a silo. So if you leverage these VMware clouds, you have high throughput access to these native services. Think of like Google Analytics, AWS access. You have access to all those native services that your developers might need or enable your development process. VMware Cloud also accelerates and unlocks innovation as well. Because you leverage suites such as vRealize Automation, you can have the ability to deploy across multiple clouds any application by leveraging these tool sets. And then you have optimization, performance, and maximize efficiency by leveraging vRealize Operation across your multi-cloud footprint. So you have a great visibility of your dashboards by leveraging those tool sets. And then lower TCO versus on-premise. Total cost of ownership is much lower compared to on-premise.
So out of curiosity, who here is currently using one or more VMware clouds, whether it's AWS, Azure, Google? Is anyone interested in looking at any of those? Okay, all right, well, we have at least one.
All right, awesome.
So, yeah, that's good.
That's good to hear. So, we talked about all the benefits of VMware Cloud, but there still comes a choice, enabling that smart cloud strategy. How do you pick the right cloud or landing zone for your application that fits your organization best? So there really is like a lot of flavors, right, for the VMware Cloud options. There's Google Cloud. This might be a good option if you're dependent on analytics or machine learning for your application. That's a good option. There's Microsoft Azure. If you're dependent on, Microsoft and their licensing capabilities, there's some good opportunities there. There's also VMware Cloud Verified partners for those looking to leverage unique use cases and have like an intimate support model with these VMware Cloud Verified partners. On-prem is still a solution as well. If you have tight security controls or security data needs to exist on-prem. You had a question, sir?
Yep.
So I have a question. When you talk about exposing these APIs of these clouds through VMware, do you put your own APIs on top of them, or do you just expose the raw APIs of these clouds?
So the question was, do we use our own APIs, or I assume, are we using like the hyperscalers APIs, or is there some abstraction of that? So I think it really depends, but typically you'll have access to the VMware APIs, right? Unless, Justin, unless you've seen differently, but it depends from provider to provider, I would think.
Yeah, it depends on provider to provider, but generally speaking, the APIs are the same across the public cloud providers. You're essentially accessing the VMware API itself to consume those services.
These are the VMware-defined APIs, right?
Right.
Correct.
Yes, VMware defined APIs. Right, because that's the key here is consistent infrastructure, regardless of what cloud you're operating in. So that consistent, whether it's API or the user interface, having that consistency is really where the benefit lies.
But then what are your capabilities of APIs relative to that of the public cloud? Because I think they have been in the industry for the last
So the question is, are we compromising on the APIs by using ours instead of perhaps like the native cloud provider? I think it's a combination of both, right?
Yeah.
So you would be using API calls to your VMware solution, VMware APIs,
Right.
but you can still use APIs if you're using native services.
Native
You can
services.
still make use of the APIs per provider for those native services. So you really get both.
But then you can't migrate your application from one.
Right, that's actually a really good point. So he had mentioned you can't migrate your application potentially if you have too much reliance on APIs for native services, right? So if you're trying to move from one to the other. So that's something you have to consider, right? As you're planning out your strategy, if you are gonna have to move that application to a different provider, you have to account for that. If you have a heavy reliance on native services, that can be a potential downside if you don't plan for that ahead of time, right?
Yeah.
What do we need to do to put SAP Cloud?
SAP Cloud, talk to me.
That's above our pay grade.
Yes, go ahead.
Reference to the term sovereign cloud.
Yes, sovereign cloud. Okay, so I would say my
Yep.
definition of sovereign cloud is understanding and having control over where your data resides, right? So if you think of like S3, for example, if you're using S3 with AWS, that storage that may exist in multiple locations, right? It's hard to control that, and it particularly becomes a concern when you're talking about different countries and whatnot, whether it's the U.S. or the U.K. They have policies that govern where that data resides. So sovereignty is really just understanding and having control over where your data resides.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
There are partners that went through the VMware Sovereign Cloud framework. So they went through that whole process and they get the stamp of approval that they are VMware Sovereign Cloud. And so if you have a unique use case where data needs to reside like within your geographical region or something like that, you can leverage those partners that have that certification. And there's a long list of them. We can talk about it. I can provide more information on it.
Yep, the VMware Cloud Verified partners, so basically not the hyperscalers, those partners, a lot of times those partners will focus on this use case because the hyperscalers, really they're worldwide and you have kind of less control over where your data is. It's harder to track, so that is a use case. Rackspace, maybe. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but we are going through, so there's VMware Cloud Verified, and then there's a similar certification, like Justin said, for some of the colos, potentially, yes.
Yeah.
And there are thousands of partners that we have, and a few hundred Cloud Verified partners, so it's not really just the major names that you're thinking of.
Yep.
There's a lot of options out there, actually.
Yes. Yeah.
To have the verified logo, I would say. So there are a certain set of criteria that we would have the provider go through to ensure that they're actually offering a sovereign cloud, and that's when they would get the verified logo. But you may find cloud providers that offer sovereign cloud without the verified logo, but that's just kind of our stamp of approval. Yep.
So depending on what application you're moving, what services you want, this aligns with your multi-cloud strategy on where you want to move these workloads. AWS, IBM, same, we have a footprint in all these public cloud providers. So, what are the differentiators across these different cloud providers? I kind of mentioned it earlier. Things to consider as you're adopting this multi-cloud strategy. Obviously, considering licensing costs. Azure is a good play for that, like I mentioned. Some of those, you have some okay. There's licensing cost considerations, like I said. There's a level of administration control that's required as well that you have to consider. Hardware sizing options that you need to factor in. All the VMware clouds aren't the same. Some allow you to have one single host, others require 3 for a minimum, so those are the things you have to consider as you're making your choice. What native services do you need? Like you mentioned, you need they have a dependency on those APIs. That's something to consider as well, where you're moving these workloads. Region availability, consider that as well. Who's the support owner? Does VMware support it? Do you have a good relationship with VMware? Is it Microsoft? If it's Microsoft, Microsoft's the tier 1 support, and VMware's tier 2. So those are things to consider. And also, obviously, are you strategically aligned to that vendor in some way? And then third-party integrations. Not all the marketplaces are the same across the public cloud providers. Some have access to F5 appliances, others don't. So those are things you want to look into before you start, when you should plan your multi-cloud strategy. And then, like the gentleman mentioned back here, networking is a big consideration, obviously. Egress, costs, east-west traffic is one of the biggest costs in the cloud. So that's a key consideration.
Do we want to open it up? Do we have any other questions? I know we're running short on time. Yes, go ahead.
Anybody talk about ARIA also?
No, we don't have anything over ARIA, but
This feeds into that.
oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's all the time we have. I'll just.
Yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to follow up with us and we can answer anything. But
Thanks, everyone.
yeah, thank you for everyone for attending.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it.